Thank you, Olive. Yeah, so this Lent we're going to do something a little unorthodox. Each Sunday we're going to hear a portion of the Gospel of Mary. And we'll also hear alongside it some of the stories from the canonical Gospels about Mary. Now, the Gospel of Mary is what we call a non-canonical gospel. It's an ancient writing about Jesus that's not included in the official biblical canon that was created at the Council of Rome in 382. Like, along with several other texts, it just didn't make the cut. Why? Well, there are many possible reasons, but most scholars would suggest the primary one, well, it was written by a woman, Mary Magdalene. But beyond that, this gospel also contains some ideas that early leaders found unsettling. So we heard in the passage that Olive read, Andrew dismissed Mary's teaching as strange ideas. Peter struggled to accept that Jesus would have spoken to a woman in such a way, choosing not to even consider that she might be telling the truth. But thankfully, Levi steps in, intervenes, reminds them that if they're truly followers of Jesus, they do not need to fear Mary's words. Now, this Gospel of Mary was actually first discovered in the late 1800s as a papyrus codex. And there was two other fragments that were found about a decade later. And while much of the text has been recovered, there are some missing parts still in the Gospel. And for years, scholars went back and forth, like, is this Mary Magdalene or Mary, mother of Jesus, or some other Mary? Maybe she was the sister of Jesus. But today it's widely accepted that this is the gospel from Mary Magdalene. And we know Mary from the canonical gospels as the first person to see Jesus after the tomb was emptied, the one who remained faithful while others fled in fear. But there are other stories of Mary, ones that reveal just how central she was to the early Jesus movement. In fact, those who followed her teachings had formed a pretty significant and influential group in that early Christian times, so much so that it was actually in 591, Pope Gregory the Great preached a sermon where he labeled Mary as the one who washed Jesus' feet with her hair, and therefore a sinful woman, and therefore a sex worker. Before that, no one had ever thought that. Obviously, the church was getting a little concerned that this group that had Mary near the center was a little too powerful. Patriarchy is not going to be able to allow a woman, to be the one the followers of Jesus look to. And yet Mary is the first person to witness the risen Christ. She's the one that remained at the cross while others ran away. She was among Jesus' most faithful disciples, an eyewitness to the resurrection. And being a witness was a key requirement for apostolic succession. And yet for the institutional church to consolidate power and exclude women from leadership, somehow we had to diminish Mary's significance. Even her title has been misunderstood. Magdalene, some assumed it referenced the place of origin where she came from, but very little evidence connects her to a specific location. There's one town far away called Migdala, but most scholars now understand Mary Magdalene. That word comes from the Aramaic meaning tower, Mary the tower. She's the one we look to when we feel lost, the one who stands firm when others falter, a refuge in the struggle, a guide in uncertainty. And that raises a very profound question. What do you do with Mary the tower when you have Peter the rock? Who will be the successor to Christ? A rock upon which to build a church, or a tower on which to lead the church and follow the way? Of course, we know the answer, how that all worked out. But this season, I want us to continue to explore the many dimensions of Mary's story, the tensions it exposes. You know, yesterday, it was International Women's Day. It's funny, that's a day that grew out of a labor movement, actually, in the early 1900s in New York City, but it's not a holiday in the United States. England, it's a 3-day weekend. Australia has marches. They've been going on forever. And speakers. It's a huge day in Australia. Chile, Argentina, Spain all celebrate International Women's Day, but it's pretty much downplayed here. Too woke, I guess. Although I do love, if you listen to KBCO, they've had International Women's Week all week. And this weekend, every song they've played Friday, Saturday, and Sunday has been a woman artist. And all the tickets they give away have been to women speakers or to concerts with women-led bands or women's singers. And for many of us, of course, it's just hard to understand why the idea of women in leadership would be so threatening. And yet, we know in our country twice, we've chosen to elect a man over women who are far more qualified to be president. Women make up 51% of our population, but only 29% of the House of Representatives, 26% of the Senate. Contrast that with Colorado, where our state legislature is now 52% women. Denver City Council is 70% women. And we know that when leadership shifts, that priorities change and the atmosphere transforms. But this is more than just about numbers. What Mary is bringing to the forefront is not only the fact that she's a woman in leadership, but the kind of leadership she embodied. She offered this different perspective, a way of seeing the world that prioritizes connection and presence and transformation. She invites us to approach faith in a way that's so deeply embodied, deeply relational, deeply rooted in love. She invites us to see the world differently. I think I've told you how my first class in seminary was called The Global Theology of Prostitution. But I might not have told you that in the second quarter, the first class that I was taking was called Sexual and Domestic Violence. In that class, we studied how patriarchal models of belief not only made space for violence to occur, but also how to cover it up and not take it seriously. A patriarchal worldview is based on this dualistic understanding of the world, where one thing is sacred and the other thing is profane. The heavens are sacred, the earth is profane. The mind is sacred, the body is profane. Men are sacred, women are profane. And so we see it played out in our lives still, cisgender sacred, transgender profane, heterosexuality sacred, homosexuality profane, white skin sacred, darker skin profane, MAGA sacred, anything else profane. Mary, though, presents a more holistic view. That's the view I think Jesus presents as well. It doesn't see the world as sacred and profane. It sees the world as a whole. All beings are sacred. And yes, we can make profane choices. All the world, the earth is sacred. And yes, we can choose to hurt the world. But that doesn't make us profane beings. When we live in a dualistic understanding of the world, it keeps us in our minds. We don't take into account how the rest of our body feels. When suffering or pain occurs, we either ignore our feelings or stay numb not to feel them. We have this idea that we can think our way out of anything. But Mary is inviting us to think in a different way, to walk in her wisdom. Mary stayed at the cross. She didn't run away when she saw his body being crucified. I'm sure she felt as much fear as the others, but she stayed and she sat with that fear. And after Jesus died and was put into the tomb, it's Mary who went early to see his body, to sit with death, to be present to everything that's going on inside of her. She didn't shy away from the hard stuff. Friends, we're living in days where there's so much hard stuff going on. And the temptation to shy away and not deal with it is so incredibly strong. Really, until our own day-to-day life changes, right? We might want to ignore all the news. And yet Mary would invite us to look toward God and step into the hard stuff, praying for ways that we can continue to be light in the world, praying for ways we can resist in ways that maybe we haven't imagined just yet. Terrence Carroll, he's a former Speaker of the House of Colorado, a wonderful Denver resident. who's broken so many barriers. He writes, "Why resist? We resist because it affirms our human dignity. We resist because it's an act of worship. We resist because it's an act of love. We resist because it demonstrates our love for God and our love for God's people. We resist because resistance makes us resilient, and our resilience is an act of resistance. We resist because the cross of Jesus is the ultimate act of resistance and resilience." So this Lent, may we listen, may we learn, and may we lean into the strength of Mary. Mary Magdalene, Mary the Tower, a refuge in a time of struggle, a guide in times of uncertainty. Amen. So rather than talk about being embodied and not practice it, for the next 6 weeks after the sermon, we're going to have a little chance for you all just to reflect with each other about what comes up. If you don't like to talk to anybody, you can sit still for 3 minutes and just pray or be with yourself. But I'm going to invite those just to find somebody around you and just share what comes up from the time of reflection for 3 minutes. Let's go.